Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new edition of the Daily Debate. In tonight's show, we're going to be tackling the Egyptian economic file. We're going to be mainly focusing on boosting the small and medium enterprises, also empowering the youth, and the government's efforts to boost as well the public business sector. And joining us here in the studio to shed more light on this issue is Mrs. Shireen Abdelbaei, the business and entrepreneurship consultant. We're also joined by Mr. محمد البيلى, member of the Egyptian Industries Federation. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, before we start our discussion, let's check out this report regarding the Cabinet's efforts in boosting and developing the state-owned companies, and we'll be right back.
The Cabinet will set up a fund to finance the development of state-owned enterprises in a move that the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, has been encouraging. The Cabinet said in a statement the new fund would contribute to settling the public business sector's debts to the banking system, provide the necessary financing for the administrative and technical reform of these companies, and contribute to the removal of financial bottlenecks. The fund will be managed by a committee headed by the Public Enterprises Minister and include members from the State Council, Finance Ministry, National Investment Bank, and the chairman of any holding company that the fund develops. The government plans to sell stakes in 3 banks, a cigarette maker, an oil services company, and a fertilizer maker, among others. It had planned to sell stakes in up to 5 companies from October till the end of 2018. Plans which were scrapped after equities across emerging markets fell steeply last year. Another 18 were expected over the next 2 to 3 years. Finance Minister محمد said the government would resume the privatization program soon. Egypt plans to sell shares in dozens of state-owned enterprises over the next few years to help boost public finances as part of the broader slate of economic reforms. But the program was delayed last year due to global market volatility. The IMF said a day earlier that Egypt's reform program tied to its 3-year loan is aimed at easing long-standing constraints to private sector development. It includes improving the management of state-owned enterprises. The IMF said in a statement that sustained implementation of these reforms is essential to reduce opportunities for rent-seeking and to support strong and inclusive medium-term growth and job creation.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, starting off right away. Now, Mr. Bailey, first off, we're seeing that the government is exerting these efforts to help really boost the public business companies and the public business sectors. Now, do you see the Egyptian government and the Egyptian economy mainly relying on the public sector or the private sector? Where do you think we should put most of our eggs? In this basket, the public sector or the private one?
Well, from my own point of view, you cannot put your eggs in one basket, definitely. And on the other hand, the public sector is a huge sector. There are lots of industry in the public sector that needs to, that the government have a closer look on them. Of course, the main problem for the public sector is the labor law. And if the government is thinking of privatizing, they have to do something with the labor law. Because any investor coming would look at these laws and 2 things: assets, which includes machinery, land, buildings, whatever, and the labor, the workforce. How is he going to handle and deal with this force, which we know ever so well in every public sector industry? It's, there are lots of workers, more than the need of the industry. On the other hand, I cannot say put all your eggs in the private sector basket, because anyway, the government has to control very important products, very vital to the citizens. So you cannot put your eggs in one basket at all. This is my point of view.
Yes, definitely. Mrs. Abdelbay, now, how far do you feel that the micro, the small and medium-sized enterprises have supported the economic growth so far during this, the late economic reform program that we've been undergoing for the past few years? How much do you feel it has achieved in terms of supporting the Egyptian economy?
Well, there's something that we have to admit. A lot of the SME sector is in the informal sector, and I think the government is trying to work hard on attracting many of those in the informal sector to formalize new laws and regulations and services that, especially financial, that would attract people to become more formal. What they have achieved, it's hard really to put a fine line on that, but there's a lot more that needs to be done. SMEs only represent 25% of investment and 10% of GDP, so it's still a long way to go, although the SMEs are 95% of private sector. So you see, it shows us that there's still room for growth and impact.
Yes, definitely. Well, Mr. Bailey, now, over the past few years, the Egyptian government has embarked on many mega projects, and a lot of people are saying, well, maybe that is the way to actually start or kickstart or jumpstart the Egyptian economy, really embarking on these mega projects, creating many job opportunities, and then it will sort of trickle down to the private sectors and the smaller businesses. And other people are saying, no, well, maybe we should start with the small and medium enterprises because because a lot of them are informal, they constitute, in a way, the backbone of the Egyptian economy. How far do you feel that embarking on these mega projects has helped really boost the domestic business sector in general, be it public or private?
Well, mega projects, we had to start by mega projects. It was a must at that time. There had to be big project to help lots of the enterprises to work. Like, for example, in the construction sector, you can find not less than 150 types of industry that serves this. Though there is no value added, okay? It's all inside. But in the end, the workers, the people, the companies started to work and started to move. The money started turning around, which is a healthy thing. Now it's time to look at the SMEs and the industry for exportation, because these are the ones that make a value added for the Egyptian economy.
Well, Mrs. Abdelbay, a lot of people, when they look at SMEs and all the startups and the entrepreneurs, now there's always this problem and obstacle of financing. Now, putting that aside, because we're going to be talking about that later on, what would you say are the main sort of obstacles facing any small and medium enterprises really starting and having a real effect? Is it turning them into part of the formal system? Is it about the experience that a lot of SMEs might lack in actually entering the market? How would you say are the main obstacles for these SMEs now?
I would say, first off, startups are the future. Not alone, but they need to be more incorporated into the economic sector, in the sense that, for example, medium and larger companies, whether local or multinationals or the banking sector, they need to improve on connecting startups to the value chain or the supply chain of the various sectors that we have in the economy. This is the only way that startup companies and new small companies will be able to enhance their performance. We don't want to keep them, as a startup. They need to grow. Of course, you mentioned one of the most important challenges, which is access to finance, but I feel there are a lot of other challenges as well. Access to information, markets, knowledge, and of course training. And there are a lot of other areas that are needed besides finance. But I think in the past 5 years we've seen a huge development in that sector. A lot of incubators and accelerators helping the youth who are starting new companies. This has created a great development in the ecosystem, but there's a lot more that needs to be done. If you're speaking about SMEs on a broader scope, you know, it's SMEs, small, medium enterprises. We fail to look at, when we speak about SMEs, we usually focus on small.
Yes.
But there are medium companies, and actually there are many that have been around for, you know, 10, 20 years, and they are actually, you know, in the process of growing to the next phase. And these are companies that we also need to look at in terms of how can they grow and become more global. As Mr. Bailey mentioned, the exports is really our you know, savior. We need to work hard to improve our export sector.
Yes, definitely. Well, Mr. Bailey, now after the 2011 revolution, many factories have shut down, or even if they're operating, they're not operating at full capacity. Now, how far did we come from that time since to operating on a full scale, getting all the labor into these factories actually working and operating? Is the labor law still a problem in that area? Are we still facing, because we are trying to export more than importing, do you feel that still a lot of effort needs to be done to actually help boost or regain the strength of these industries?
Of course. There has to be much more effort. Labor law is a problem. It might not be that big problem for the private sector, but we shouldn't forget that the public sector and the public industry is a huge industry that we need to look at, whether to find companies or professionals to manage, because most of these companies lack management experience, though managers in these companies take lots of courses, but they are tied by the labor law. And not only the labor law, they are tied by the control from the government. He should do this, he shouldn't do this, why did he do this? And whoever is judging this are employees sitting on desks. So if you come, for example, to a chairman of a company, an industrial company, and this chairman needs to do a right thing from his point of view, but this employee on the desk doesn't understand this. So he cannot take a step. You see, this happens everywhere in the public sector. So it's not only the labor law, but also the control that comes from the government controlling these companies. It ties the hands of the knowledgeable managers that needs to manage in the right way and boost the company.
Yes. Well, Mrs. Abdelbay, you've mentioned some of the challenges facing the SMEs and the startups is the access to information and the access to training. Now, the youth, when they want to start their own businesses and the startups, they're very much in a hurry and they're very enthusiastic and they're actually willing maybe to take risks. However, maybe not having enough information or not enough training gets in the way. Now, is this the duty of the government to help support these people, the youth, or are we as youth still need to do our own bit of work and reach out for more information, reach out for more training that might in a way derail the startup of the business, but still very essential nevertheless?
As you mentioned, education is a must. Continuous learning is essential. All kinds of knowledge are available now on the internet, you know, at workshops, training centers. It's not inaccessible. Everything is accessible now to everybody. And actually, you'd be surprised, a lot of young people starting out in business are far more advanced than people who've been around for 10 years in other sectors. The important thing is actually linkages. It's, you know, a lot of, and by the way, startups are not only by young people. Startups could be by people who have decided to, you know, go into a transitional stage or even later on in their life. So a startup is mostly young people, but not only. So what I was mentioning earlier about linkages is about connecting companies to markets, whether it's in the IT sector or the, you know, manufacturing sector or services. Locally, it's important for companies to succeed locally before going globally. And as I said, exports is the future, and this is what we need. And globalization or exports to global markets is what's needed. How is that going to happen? It's going to have to be through digital transformation. And this is where a lot of training would come in, like you said. Not everybody is in the tech industry. There could be linkages between people, you know, cross-sectoral cooperation. Government, well, for example, the Ministry of Industry has created its own accelerator and does support startups, and this is a great effort. However, the private sector is really, you know, a huge area where companies are growing. As I mentioned, and I'm emphasizing again, existing companies should incorporate the knowledge and the, you know, awareness of the new startup companies, whether it's in the digital field or, you know, innovation. And this is how actually our market will grow.
Yes, definitely. Well, Mr. Bailey, you've mentioned certain difficulties manifested mainly in the labor law and other bureaucratic challenges. Now, do you feel that the already existing industries and the already existing companies, are they doing enough to actually not just operate at their full potential, but really reimagining or restructuring into this whole age of a digital economy, transforming the way the operations are being carried out? Do you feel that already these industries are taking that path, or are they still stuck in the old traditional ways of making a business and producing their own products?
You're speaking about the industry, the private sector, or the...
Both.
The private sector, definitely. The private sector, they feel that they have to run, they have to get into the new technologies and new ideas, digitalization, for example, and so on. Public sector, no. But the government, now I have information that they are pushing now the public sector, not to privatize only, but to start moving forward instead of just sitting there paralyzed. This the government sure is doing.
Yes. Well, how quick do you feel the public sector will be responding to these reforms, to these, let's say, for the lack of better words, changing of the guards and the changing of the system? How do you feel they will respond to that? Will they be able to adapt as quick as they should be?
No, slowly.
Mrs. Abdelbaqi, now, over the past few years, there's been a lot of talk about attracting the foreign investor and attracting foreign investors here with their businesses, with their ideas, with the know-hows and the training and everything. Now, this is definitely an important part to boost the Egyptian economy. But do you feel that this might constitute any sort of competition for the private sector and the domestic businessmen here? And if so, is it a healthy competition?
I wouldn't say it's competition. It's needed. It's necessary. You need to have foreign direct investment, of course, to, you know, boost the economy. But it's also important to assist the local industry. You can't focus on one or the other. You need to have both. it's an ongoing process. And I think now with a lot of improvements and developments by the Ministry of Industry and Trade and also the Ministry of Investment and International Cooperation, a lot of agreements have been put in place. Development, like the main obstacles in the past, registering, licensing, approvals for company establishment, is now a matter of days when it used to take months in the past. Even in the industrial sector, it was maybe 2 years before you can get any kind of. So it's now 2 weeks. That's already a great development. But as Mr. Bailey mentioned, what's important is also the training, the ongoing training of the implementation of these agreements. The staff, the people, the people working in the government sector and offering the services. They need to be on the same level as these agreements, for example, the public sector companies as well. I wouldn't say that foreign investors will be a competition. There's going to be some kind of movement in the market. It's necessary. It's inevitable. We've been waiting for it for some time. So yes, I hope it happens, but not to lose sight of local industry and what people are facing here, what they need here. Because if you succeed in the local industry, it will only be an attraction for the foreign investment.
Yes, definitely. Well, Mr. Bailey, a lot of amendments, a lot of talk has been focused mainly on the investment law, trying to encourage the investment atmosphere here in Egypt, especially for foreign investment. How far do you feel that we've accomplished in this regard? And also not just the investment law, but also the labor law, also trying to cut on the bureaucratic and red tape procedures that would have taken much longer for the licenses and the permissions and for the operations to actually start being implemented?
Well, definitely, government have taken big steps, but still we have lots to do and we have a long way to go, especially, as I say again, the employees themselves. They have to understand the idea that we have to change. We have to change. Government is trying. Ministers are trying. They are doing so much efforts, but they are pulling a very heavy load. So we still have a long way to go, but we shouldn't, I don't know what to say, we shouldn't forget what the government and the cabinet and the ministers are doing and their efforts towards this. But still, we have lots to do.
Yes, definitely. Well, ladies and gentlemen, talking about the efforts that has been done by the government and the ministers, now the Minister of Industry and Foreign Trade announced a draft law to develop the small and medium enterprises. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.
The Minister of Industry and Foreign Trade announced that his ministry completed forming a draft law to develop micro, small and medium-sized enterprises. The draft law was submitted to the House of Representatives for approval. The minister said the draft law includes defining the tariffs and incentives for these types of enterprises, which represent 80% of Egyptian economic structure, in addition to means of financing them. The draft law is the result of a second meeting with the Board of Directors of Small and Medium Enterprises Development Authority. The minister pointed out this law would abolish the previous law number 141 for 2004, which applies to small and very small enterprises, as it will grant the Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises Development Authority the power to supply funds directly or indirectly and provide technical support to SMEs. The minister also said the new national strategy to develop SMEs and startups was set up upon the strategic goals for sustainable development in the Egyptian 2030 vision. He added the strategy aims to create a competitive and balanced economy based on innovation, knowledge, justice and social integrity to receive sustainable development. He further reiterated the strategy aims to increase contributions of innovative SMEs to economic growth, improve the surrounding environment of SMEs and encourage entrepreneurs. New law came into effect under which SMEs are taxed under a simplified system. It is aimed at encouraging firms and companies to operate in the formal economy.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Continuing our discussion, Mrs. Abdelbaei, now we're talking about the financing aspect of the businesses, mainly the SMEs. Now, Minister of Industry and Foreign Trade Tariq Qabil announced the completion of this draft law that would include defining the tariffs and the incentives to encourage these SMEs, really giving them more power and control. Do you feel that this would help the SMEs moving forward, or is it a different direction than what the SMEs were hoping for?
Regulations, of course, are essential. There is no harm in the regulations. Hopefully, it will not, suffocate actual running of business. But what's more important is what's going to happen after the implementation. Is there really going to be a change of mind? For example, when we talk about obstacles in finance or challenges, there was the presidential decree, and the CBE, the Central Bank of Egypt, announced the 200 billion fund. This was 2 years ago, or even a bit more. Only 50 billion has been used, and I think it's because the banks are used to dealing with larger corporations and the risk management and analysis and all what's related to evaluating any proposal or application for credit is related to that. So when it comes to a small or micro or startup, it's completely different viewpoint, and the bank officers need to be trained for how to assess these companies. So that's only one example of. So it's not that the money is not there; it's that the mentality and the mind frame needs to be developed and connected to what's happening with the startup, because it's a different frame of mind.
Yes, definitely.
So that's one example of...
Well, Mr. Bailey, now we understand the difficulties that some startups or SMEs might face in financing. What about the public sector and the public companies that would be privatized? What sort of financial difficulties would they face? Because with the whole limitation on imports maybe and trying to boost the exports, does that mean that there is still a lot of difficulty in importing raw materials for different industries to actually start operating in a satisfactory manner?
You're asking about the public sector, yes, taking a role in the
financial difficulties for the public sector.
Well, the public sector, most of it is in debt to the banks, and many companies, the banks doesn't finance them. So if you want to take a step and boost the performance of these companies, there has to be a plan how to approach this problem that they already have now. On the other hand, for them to start working more, importation of goods is opened. The problems for importation is not for this sector. If they need goods, they can import, but they need finance. So this is a very big problem for the public sector that has to be handled cleverly. I can see, I'm dealing with public sector, of course, and I can see companies that have lots and lots of opportunities and abilities to catch these opportunities, but they are hand-tied because of the finance and because of the debt that came through many years of work and through lots of workers that are not needed. So they are paying money to the workers, they are paying salaries, and there is no actual production that can compete with imported products. But now, let me tell you, because of the almost banning of the importation in many sectors, private sector started to manufacture what they were importing. So the public sector has to move parallel with the private sector, but the government has to have an active plan to solve their financial problem.
Yes, well, do you feel that one way of dealing with it would be privatizing the public companies?
We have passed by a big privatization process in the beginning of the 2000s. Okay? Now we understand the advantages and the disadvantages. Okay? So, yes, I am with privatization, but we have to overcome all the disadvantages that we faced in the past years. It's well known. Investors, nowadays, globally, economically, money is everywhere. Everybody is looking where to put the money safely and to get the highest profit. So during the privatization process, many investors looked at the assets. They didn't look at the product, they didn't look at the machinery, just assets. Companies that had their land or their buildings were rented, they were not sold. Nobody looked at them. Companies that had assets, some of them were privatized and then demolished, and the land was sold. So these are problems and disadvantages that happened. So we have to look at it very closely and try to overcome it. That's it.
Yes. Well, Mrs. Abdelbay, you've mentioned that the Central Bank of Egypt had a couple of years ago the 200 million that were offered for the SMEs, and only 50 have been used. Now, why would you say only a quarter of that amount has been used? Is it due to the lack of having solid grounds for the SMEs to start up their business? Is it hard to find the loans, getting the loans for the businessmen from the banks? Is it a problem in the process? Is it a problem of trust? Is it a problem of trying to minimize the risk-taking element in these businesses?
I would say it's a combination of two things. One, as I mentioned earlier, it's the bank process and the actual bank officers delivering the process. They need to be retrained with the mind frame related to small companies and specifically startups, because startups is completely different in nature. For example, they're starting out, you're investing in the management team, you're investing in the idea, you're investing in the future and the potential high growth. So there's no collateral. The collateral should be the project itself. This is just one example. So it's the training and the mindset of the bank officers. And the other thing is knowledge transfer. Maybe not enough information has been widespread related to the ease or how easy it would be to access. People are still afraid of, people who are not dealing with banks. Many are unbanked and also those who are starting out. So how easy it would be to access and approach a bank, the process, maybe more media awareness, visibility of the process should be made known to people. So it's those two factors are needed.
So do you feel that this banking culture that it doesn't seem as strong as it needs to be in Egypt and among the business enterprises here, how long do you feel that it would take for the businesses to actually, and the citizens and the personnel in general, to grasp and really have this banking culture in a very clear and safe mindset?
Well, there are two things taking place now. Very quickly, the banking sector is realizing how necessary it is for people to be online and to access online services and to attract people to becoming more banked and bankable. So this is actually happening quite quickly, and I think the government is implementing some regulations where you would have to pay for a lot of your utility services online. So people will be actually forced to open bank accounts or access bank services. On the other hand, you'd be surprised because there's something that needs to be clarified about the startup sector and the ecosystem. It's a whole life of its own.
Yes.
There are other ways to access finance besides banks. Now there are venture capital companies, there are angel investors, and most of the small companies start out with family and friends. So there are other means. So until they reach the stage where they actually need a bank, there's some room and there are now options in the market.
Yes. Well, Mr. Bailey, now Egypt is really adopting this its vision of sustainable development for 2030 and the whole of Africa for 2063. Now, how much do you feel that the Egyptian industries, be it public sector, private sector, really trying to shift and adopt this new direction of achieving sustainable development, a goal that needs to be reached by the year 2030? Are we still operating or trying to have this business mindset, the traditional one, or are people trying to shift and really keeping an eye out for a new direction, a new mentality of achieving sustainable development?
No, I think everybody is looking to this plan and working on it. That's what I feel, really. But I want to say a comment. I totally agree with Dr. Baki, what she said for the small and medium enterprises. But I want to highlight two things, in fact, which are obstacles for the small and medium enterprises. First thing is the land. You see, if any small enterprise wants to do a factory, for example, they are going to pay not less than £1 to £2 million for a piece of land, maybe 300 or 400 meters squared. When you go to the ministry, they say, why doesn't they go to the Upper Egypt? Why don't they go to Beni Suef? And things like that. So, but they have to know that 20% of the population of Egypt is around Cairo. Okay, so any small and medium enterprise, to start, they need somewhere around. When you go somewhere around, you are faced with 2,000, 3,000 Egyptian pounds per square meter, which is killing for anybody, not for the small, but even for the medium. Second thing, the tax law. Why don't we come up with a simple tax law for the small and medium enterprises? We have 5 tax types, okay, for the companies. 5 types of taxes. For the small and medium enterprises, this is killing. We want to let them concentrate on their work. Why doesn't the government think outside of the box and come out with a simple tax law that doesn't make the small and medium enterprises and the entrepreneurs afraid of getting into an industry and being in debt for banks, and tax authorities are running after them, and social insurance is running after them? Why don't we make a simple law for these people to start work? There is a lot to be done.
Yes, definitely. Well, Mrs. Abdelbayi, now, as Mr. Bailey has mentioned, now a lot of the SMEs, especially startups for young businessmen and young entrepreneurs, now they actually start a business and then they close it, they shut it down. Is it mainly a reason because of the financing, the tax laws, the mismanagement, the lack of experience? Are they targeting the wrong market? Is it a lack of information? Is it a lack of experience? Is it just basically a risk that didn't go out as planned?
I think it's a combination of all of those factors, but that's worldwide. And startups and entrepreneurs are by nature starting something and leaving it, and or finishing it, or selling it, or or moving on to the next big idea. That's natural. That's not the problem. The problem is two things. For sure, a lot of improvements are still required in the tax laws and setting up business, and we've come a long way, but there's a lot more to be done to facilitate and to ease the process, for sure. Also, information. We need to have more information that is accessible to the public. What are the sectors that are available? What are the areas that are more attractive and lucrative? With some statistics, people need information to be able to, data to be able to build their plan on it. So for sure, information, regulations. But there's another thing you mentioned about experience and outlook. We need to have a spread of education about entrepreneurship and business at universities and schools, and this could open up minds from an earlier stage. We should have not only academic education, but more hands-on. For example, schools and universities should offer career days where people can go and spend the day and visit an actual factory or an actual clinic or whatever it is, to see how it's actually operating before going into it. There's a lot needed. Of course, recently the Minister of Education has created a lot of improvement. It's just the beginning, scratching the surface, and this will hopefully open the way to better improvements for young people to know more about what careers they can actually go into. And as we mentioned, these obstacles or challenges that are available in the market, I think, are also forcing or attracting people to move into services more than industry and manufacturing because of these challenges. How can you get a piece of land or a permit or to build? So people end up in areas that are less capital intensive and requiring less to start.
Yes.
So,
well, Mrs. Abdelbay, what areas or what sectors do you feel that the young entrepreneurs and the young business youth should actually really focus on? Is it because everyone mainly is focusing on the services sector? Do you feel that there are other markets that still haven't been exploited yet?
For sure. Agriculture is very important. Tourism. Industry. These three are essential, and there are huge opportunities in our country, but we need the information to help link both sides. But there's nothing wrong with being in services. It's a great industry, and it can grow even further, and we could be a hub for all the service providing, especially in tech. We have a lot of bright people in the tech industry, whether from here exporting it, or actually people are actually going abroad and using their skills, but starting here would be great to keep people here and expand on these abilities that we have to offer.
Definitely. Well, Mr. Bailey, now it seems that one of the main sectors that is quite booming here in Egypt is the energy sector, with all the natural gas findings and having the three biggest electrical power plants. The renewable energy power plant in the oil mountain. Do you feel that this is a sector that really a lot of businessmen, a lot of industries should explore more and should embark on?
Well, of course, yes, but this is a big sector and needs lots of finance and big players, of course. And here, these two sectors now are booming in Egypt. Electricity, we are on the verge of exporting now. Oil and gas, of course, of Zohra and Al Amal fields, which will put us in a different position than what we were. So, of course, yes, these are sectors that need foreign investors, really. And it's profitable. The laws and the regulations in these sectors are very encouraging to foreign investors to come.
Yes. Mr. Bailey, you've also mentioned earlier a problem with the management and the middle management mainly, and really not being up to date or really not being in touch with the difficulties that the businessman on the field is facing. What would you say could be done about that?
Training, as Dr. Baki said, training. We have to train these people to make them understand that the country needs investment, needs exports, needs lots of work to be done. Another thing I would like to add regarding the small and medium enterprises. If I give you a piece of land and tell you cultivate, and then you cultivate, you get, for example, you cultivated potatoes, for example, or watermelon, and then what will you do? How are you going to sell them? Who is going to buy them? So I'm going to leave you to the huge cats and traders. This is a point. For small and medium enterprises, they need marketing. In Japan, when they started, they completely separated between the manufacturing process and the marketing and sales. Companies are specialized in marketing and sales. Companies are specialized in the manufacture. You see, so the small and medium enterprises needs help with the marketing, okay, so that they can be encouraged to work more, to develop, because somebody is taking their product and looking at it and guiding them.
Yes.
So this is important.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, obviously there's a lot of effort exerted by the government to help boost the public and private sectors and the SMEs. But as my distinguished guests have mentioned, still a lot of work needs to be done by ourselves as well. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. But before we go, I'd like to thank my distinguished guest, Ms. Shireen Abdelbei, the business and entrepreneurship consultant. I'd also like to thank my very distinguished guest, Mr. محمد البيلى, the member of the Egyptian Industries Federation. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all for this edition of the Daily Debate. I'm Hani Saif. Thank you for joining us. But now, please check out the Presidency's activities throughout the past week. Thank you for joining us.